What if a single piece of cardboard could become a beautiful Christmas deer? After years of working with cardboard and paper mâché, I'm creating one of my most ambitious Christmas projects, a small-scale, fully sculpted deer. No molds, no foam, only cardboard, grocery bags, paper mâché and fabric. For this project you will need a large piece of corrugated cardboard. This is where we are going to trace the body of our deer, but just the trunk for now. By trunk, I mean the neck, belly and bottom of the deer, not the legs or the head. We will make those separately so we can use different techniques and also give ourselves the freedom to choose the posture we like best. I don't just start tracing the deer's body randomly. To get the proportions right, I use circles, one for the bottom and one for the neck area. This helps me get the right curve for the belly when I connect them with lines. If you are a beginner and want to nail body proportions, I recommend using a drawing mannequin and practicing visualizing the body as simple shapes. Start with circles for the main body parts and joints, then connect them with squares, rectangles and triangles to define the rest of the body. That's exactly what I'm doing here, starting with circles and connecting them with lines. Next, I trace the legs the same way. I start with a circle to mark the most muscular part of the leg, make sure the proportion feels right, and then draw narrowing lines down to the foot. I only make one front leg and one back leg because I will use each as a template for the second leg of the pair. For the back leg, I curve it backward. If you check a reference picture like I do, you will see it's not straight. For the head, I again begin with a large circle for the skull. I attach a rectangle for the muzzle and create a sloping line from the top of the rectangle down to about halfway along the bottom edge to mimic a real muzzle shape. Then I add an eye just to double check that my proportions look right. Once I'm happy with all my base shapes, I cut out every element. Then I make a duplicate of each one. This is why starting with a very large piece of corrugated cardboard is important. You don't want to end up with only one side. We are making a 3D deer, so we need two sides plus something to connect them. That connecting piece is made from long cardboard bands. I cut several wide bands to match the depth I want my deer's body to have. I roll these bands by hand to break the cardboard fibers, which helps them bend and follow the curves of the body. Then I tape them between the two sides of the deer. If your band isn't long enough to go all the way around the body, don't worry, just connect several bands together with masking tape. It works perfectly and doesn't weaken the structure at all, especially since we'll keep adding materials later. Earlier, I mentioned duplicating each body part, and that's true, except for the legs. The legs come in pairs of 2, not 4, because I use a different technique to turn them into 3D shapes. Since I made them separately to emphasize the thick thigh muscles, I want those thighs to connect directly to the body and then reinforce the lower part of the leg. To do that, I tape a triangular cardboard band to the back of each leg, right under the thigh. The legs end up looking a bit like rackets, then I tape them onto the body. Next, I tape the head onto the neck, tilting it slightly, and I close the gap by adding a cardboard wall between the two sides. At this point, the shape works. Almost. After sipping on it, I realized the legs looked a bit too short, so I extended them using extra cardboard triangles. Then I cut 4 1-inch wide cardboard bands, roll them to break the fibers, and wrap them around the bottom of each foot. This gives the deer a stable base so it can stand properly, and it also helps suggest cloven hooves. I trace and cut the antlers using double corrugated cardboard. I tape them onto the deer and reinforce the thicker parts by adding cardboard bands behind the visible antlers. Once that's done, I cover all exposed corrugation with masking tape so I have a sealed smooth surface to work on. I don't want a boxy deer, so I start building volume. I soften the edges first by taping rolled paper bands along the back, neck and belly edges. Then I grab plastic grocery bags, roll them into oval shapes and tape them around the eye and muzzle areas. I do the same on the legs using a reference photo to get the muscle and fat placement right. I also build up the thighs and belly with more bags, being careful not to lose important shapes like the angles in the back legs. At this point, the deer looks like it's made entirely of plastic bags, and I'm sure you can even recognize some of my favorite stores on it, but no advertisement intended. Next comes paper mâché. I cover the entire deer with small squares soaked in a mix of water and glue. Make sure the pieces are small, they stick much better, especially since the plastic reduces natural adhesion. Smaller pieces also help prevent bubbles, which can cause the paper to lift or fall off when it dries. This isn't the final look, even though it already looks pretty cool. It's just the base. You could paint it at this stage, but I decided to cover mine with a deerskin style cotton fabric from Hobby Lobby that I found on sale before the holidays. If you are using a similar fabric, you will need to cut cut it into sections that can wrap smoothly around the body without creating bubbles. My fabric pieces ended up matching the original cardboard shapes, one for the trunk covering only the flanks, leg pieces that don't include the inner legs, and the same idea for the neck, just the outer walls. The great thing about this cotton fabric is that it sticks really well to the cardboard with just glue, so you don't need to stitch it except in spots that lift after it dries. The downside, once it dries, it gets pretty stiff, so stitching through it takes a big needle and something to push it through. I started by covering the flanks, then moved on to the back, legs, bottom, and finally the neck. For the head, I planned something different, so I left it uncovered at first. I chose a soft cream fleece fabric because it curves really well around rounded shapes. I glued it in place, cutting carefully to avoid wrinkles. Since the fabric is stretchy, glue alone wasn't enough, so I stitched the pieces together around the head. To blend the head and neck, I added a beige furry fabric between them. Some deer naturally have a kind of neck collar, and that's the look I was going for. And that's when I realized I had forgotten the ears. I briefly thought about leaving the deer earless, but since I'm a perfectionist, I couldn't. I ended up using cardboard shoe inserts from a new pair of sneakers, trimmed them slightly, and turned them into ears. They work perfectly, the hollow shape mimics the inside of an ear, and they already have the right curve. I covered the ears with the same light fur fabric and stitched it in place. Inside the ears, I added the same beige furry fabric as the collar. And by the way, you can totally do this stitching in front of the TV at night. Just keep the lights on so you don't stab yourself. I made the tail using the same fur, just a small triangle stitched and attached near the bottom. Honestly, I could have stopped there, but since I love complex designs, I added another festive fabric from Hobby Lobby. I stitched it under the belly, under the tail, along the bottom of the neck and across the back. I rolled and stitched the edges because the fabric I chose frays easily. Once all that was done, I finally moved on to the eyes and muzzle using paper mâché clay. You can use the link to my recipe, it's the one that shows at the top of your screen to make your own. Even with years of experience and having recently won an indestructible prize for my Cinderella skeleton, I still find this part stressful. Paper mâché clay sticks fast and dries quickly, so there is very little room for mistakes. You need to know exactly what you're doing. If this step feels intimidating, you can absolutely use glass eyes instead and pin them into the structure. For the muzzle, you could paint it, but you won't get the raised, realistic look I'm aiming for. To get a clear idea of what I want for my paper mâché clay, I start by drawing the shape of the eye on parchment paper right over the deer's face. I do the same for the muzzle, then I spread fresh paper mâché clay from the fridge in a thick, even layer over the template, flip it, and use a tool to mark the eye shape on the other side. I cut out the shape with a stencil, including the iris in the middle. Next, I transfer the shape onto a silicone mat with a flat tool, roll a small ball of clay and place it behind the iris hole. I blend it with a little water, trace lines for the eye contours and slightly raise the eyelid. Once I'm happy with it, I glue the eye onto the deer in its spot and let it dry. I don't do the second eye yet since I could accidentally damage the first one. Instead, I move on to the muzzle. I start with a clay layer the size of the muzzle but thinner than what I use for the eyes. Using parchment paper and aluminum foil, I shape the dimensions and then build up the nostrils, the only part that will be raised. I shape them like almonds and extend the walls upwards. It takes time to get the shape you like, and that's okay. You want to take the time to make it look nice. If you were selling it, this time should definitely be reflected in the price. Once the muzzle looks right, I glue the area on the deer, transfer the clay with a pie server and smooth it in place like I did with the eye, blending it into the fabric for better adhesion. That's it for the clay for now. I let these features dry before touching the second eye, being careful not to press on the clay while it sets. Now it's time to work on the antlers. I debated wrapping them in burlap cord, but I also had taupe fleece fabric. Since I couldn't make my mind, I left the decision to my 7-year-old daughter and she chose the fleece. I think she was right. Burlap would have given a rustic look which would have been fine, but I wanted softness and realism, so fur works best. I glue a piece of fabric slightly larger than the antler, make a few small slits so it hugs the curves well, and sew together the parts that aren't glued at the back using the extra fabric to seal it. With the antlers done, it's time to paint the eyes and muzzle. I go slow here to avoid getting paint on the fabric, so I mask around the areas first with masking tape. I like to mix paint, wax crayon and markers. That's my little signature trick. It really brings the colors to life and softens the clay. I start with a light cream on half the eyelid, then add dark brown around the pupil and finish with black for the rest. I always go light to dark. Dark is hard to fix if it goes wrong. For the muzzle, I carve a little heart shape in the center, painted black, and the red scream like the eyes. Once dry, I finish the second eye and do any last stitching. Then I add the cloven hoofs with the same fur as the neck. Taupe would have matched the antlers, but the fur gives a softer, nicer texture, I think. Finally, I varnish the eyes for a glossy, lifelike look. And voila, my deer is done. I might add jingle bells later, but for now, I'm calling it finished. What do you think? If you enjoyed this project, give the video a thumbs up. If you love cardboard decor, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. I wish you a very Merry Christmas. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Happy crafting!